So first of all, I'd just like to say I feel very privileged to introduce Adrian to lead the first workshop. I have read your first book and eagerly awaiting to read your second book as well.
Cool.
So thank you very much for joining us today. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Adrian, before he joins us. So Adrian is a part-time primary school teacher, the education policy co-lead at the Mindfulness Initiative, and founder of Teachappy. Teachappy. In 2012, he was awarded a Happy Hero Medal by Lord Richard Layard at the House of Lords for his work on developing wellbeing in schools. And he's now going to lead a session with us today, which is titled, Can Schools Make You Happier? So hopefully, Adrian, that gives everyone a little bit of background, but please feel free to add any further details in. So it's over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Amy. Let me get my presentation started. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, as Amy said, my presentation is called Can School Make You Happier, which is the title of an animation that I created during lockdown. I wrote a script for an animation, got an animator to kind of bring it to life for me. And if you haven't seen it already, then I will share it in the chat after this. As Amy said, Amy's already introduced me. Just one thing to add, I'm also the deputy chair of the board for the Well Schools movement, which if you haven't heard of it, I would thoroughly recommend your schools kind of sign up. It's run by the Youth Sports Trust. It's essentially a movement to get schools that want to place wellbeing at the heart of their curriculum together to share best practice, to learn from each other, to share resources. So yeah, Google wellschool.org and kind of sign up to your school. You just make a pledge really that you want to put wellbeing at the heart of what you do in your school communities. I wear lots of different hats and really I just want to say on this point that I do that because I'm able to do that because I work flexibly. Since 2016, when my first son was born, I've worked part-time in schools, and yeah, I'm able to kind of take advantage of various opportunities that have come my way because I have that flexibility in my work. Flexible working doesn't necessarily mean part-time working, but I would encourage schools as well in terms of promoting staff wellbeing to look at ways that staff can work flexibly and take advantage of different opportunities that come their way. So this is just an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to give a definition of what I mean by happiness and well-being. We'll look at is well-being and happiness something you can actually teach? We'll look at why pupil happiness and well-being matters so much. And then we'll look at various ways that we can weave well-being into what we do in our classrooms. And I'll take you through these various bits. So what is happiness and well-being? I really like this definition of happiness, which comes from Professor Paul Dolan, who's written a brilliant book called Happiness by Design. He says that happiness is your experience of pleasure and purpose over time. And he says that a happy life is about trying to get the balance right between those two kind of facets of happiness. And in his book, he gives an example of his friend who lives in Ibiza, is very wealthy, doesn't really have to work, and goes out partying the whole time. And he says that friend's life is very high on pleasure, but low on purpose. That friend isn't really working, isn't really contributing to society in any meaningful way. So overall, he says that friend isn't very satisfied with their life. Conversely, he gives an example of another friend of his who's a carer, taking care of a relative that needs a lot of care and support. And he says overall, that friend isn't very satisfied with their life because their life is high on purpose. What they're doing with their life is important and meaningful to them, but it's low on pleasure. They're not carving out time for themselves to follow their interests, their passions, just to do things that they enjoy just for the sake of doing them. So Paul Dolan strongly argues that a happy life or a happier life is about trying to get the balance right between taking part in pleasurable activities, but also purposeful and meaningful ones. And crucially, purposeful activities are not necessarily enjoyable whilst you're doing them. And what often springs to mind when I think about this pleasure purpose kind of balance is teaching and also being a parent. There are many aspects of being a parent, being a teacher that are really, really important and really meaningful, but they're not necessarily enjoyable. So just to give a very practical example, last night, very windy, my 2.5-year-old son woke up about 3 or 4 times in the night. I think he was scared. It's been Halloween. He's a bit freaked out by all the pumpkins. The wind last night, I think, was spooking him out. And basically, my wife and I had to kind of take it in turns to go in there and settle him. Was that enjoyable? Not at all. And it, knowing how important sleep is to well-being, not getting good night's sleep kind of does affect my wife and I. However, it is still a purposeful act to go into the bedroom, to settle my son so that he feels safe and secure, so he can get a good night's sleep. That is important, but it's not enjoyable. And there are many aspects, I guess, we can take from teaching. Really, really important stuff that we do. It's not necessarily enjoyable at the time, doesn't make it any less important. Psychologists get a bit more technical. They use terms like subjective well-being, which is your sense of life satisfaction overall, taking all things into account. How satisfied are you with your life? And it's also about your experience of positive and negative emotions. And again, this is really important. It's something that I always teach children in my class, is that a happy life includes negative emotions. Happiness is not about trying to push away the negative and cling on to the positive, because all that does is create further tension, actually creates more kind of unhappiness. A happier life is about learning how to be with the full spectrum of emotions, because sadness, anxiety, loneliness, heartache, these are natural human responses to life's ups and downs. And then psychologists link purpose to psychological well-being, which is your sense of meaning and purpose in life, but also it's about your sense of engagement. So I guess this links in a way to mindfulness. It's about being present with what you're doing. So we can be a teacher, we can be a parent, but if we are distracting ourselves on our phones the whole time, we're just going through the motions, we're not fully engaged in those activities, then we might score low on psychological well-being. So overall, in terms of having a high levels of well-being, or saying that you have a happy life, if you are high on subjective well-being, you're enjoying what you're doing overall, you feel satisfied with your life, you're experiencing on balance more positive than negative emotions, you have the inner resources to handle those difficult emotions, plus you're engaged in activities that are important and meaningful to you, overall you would be deemed to be leading a happy, fulfilling life. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about happiness and well-being, and I use those two terms interchangeably. And it's important to say the science of well-being, which is what I'm going to be sharing with you, sometimes called positive psychology, the science of happiness, the science of well-being. It is a growing but rigorous field. Like I had someone DM me. No, they tweeted me by accident. They thought they were messaging a friend by DM, but they actually tweeted me by accident and said, yeah, he's a nice guy, but what he talks about is fluffy nonsense. And they were talking about my work around well-being in schools. And it made me laugh because, I don't take criticisms like that personally. I see it seriously as essentially ignorance on the part of the person that is saying that, because they are completely ignorant of decades of empirical studies that are coming out from some of the top institutions around the world around what contributes to human happiness and well-being. So Oxford University not only has a wellbeing research centre, it has the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. Cambridge University has the Wellbeing Research Institute. The London School of Economics has a whole department dedicated to the science and study of wellbeing. Yale and Harvard University, the most popular courses in the university's histories are positive psychology courses. And you've got Berkeley University, part of the University of California. And these are just a few of the institutions. There are more out there. So this is not fluffy nonsense. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't a self-help movement. This is scientists and psychologists and economists looking at what is it that contributes to human well-being, what is it that detracts from it, and then using that science, that evidence, to make informed decisions about how we lead our lives. So is happiness and well-being something you can actually teach? This gentleman, Professor Richie Davidson, would argue strongly, yes, it is. He's written a brilliant article. Again, I'll share the link in the chat at the end, talking about the skills of well-being. And Richie Davidson says he's based at the University of Wisconsin, and he's a world-renowned neuroscientist. He says that well-being is a skill, just like any other skill. And all of his research and his colleagues' research, which is over a few decades, points to this undeniable conclusion that well-being is no different to learning to say how to play the cello. If you practice the skills of well-being, if you're taught the skills of well-being and then you practice them, your well-being improves. You get better at well-being. And he knows this because he's a neuroscientist. And what he does as part of his studies is scans people's brains. And he can detect changes in neural matter, kind of neural activity, neural pathways that are detectable in brain imaging kind of technology, where people are asked to do kind of well-being interventions. And as part of these studies, they fill in kind of self-report questionnaires. So they're answering questions about their levels of anxiety, depression, well-being, life satisfaction, etc., etc. And those self-report studies often show changes between baseline kind of reports and then after people have taken part in well-being initiatives. But what Richard Davidson takes it one step further, and he measures people's brains before these interventions and after, and he can measure visible physical changes in the brain where people are reporting feeling happier, calmer, more fulfilled. And there are changes in neural activity from, say, the right prefrontal cortex, which typically processes negative emotions, to the left prefrontal cortex, which typically processes positive emotions. So he and many other positive psychologists would argue that, you know, we can learn the skills of well-being to improve our well-being. This gentleman, Dr. Alejandro Adler, is another positive psychologist. He was based at the University of Pennsylvania. He's now at Columbia. What he wanted to do was create a well-being curriculum. So he wanted to train teachers to teach students the skills of well-being and then get them to practice those skills. So yeah, and he wanted to do it on scale as well. So he trained up hundreds of teachers, and the first study was done in Bhutan, and there were between 7,000 and 8,000 students as part of this study. So it's a really large study, plus it was a randomized control trial. So this is often cited as being the kind of gold standard of research. And one of the main benefits of RCTs is that you can see a causal relationship between an intervention and the changes. So you can say confidently, yes, these changes were because of this intervention, because we've had control schools doing different interventions, and we can see that there were little or no changes in their levels of well-being. So what he did as part of this study, he measured all the students' well-being at the beginning before the well-being curriculum had been taught. They were split into the blue gross national happiness curriculum schools, which is the blue line, and then the red line is for the control schools. Over a period of 15 months, or you can see at 0 months at the beginning of the graph, levels of well-being were pretty much the same among all students. Over a period of 15 months, which is when the well-being curriculum is being taught, the well-being curriculum students, their well-being gradually but significantly improved over a period of 15 months. And then over the following year, those levels were maintained, even though the curriculum had stopped being taught. And part of the reason for that is because the curriculum was teaching the skills of well-being and then getting students to practice those skills. And this is really important. It's the action, it's the practice that makes the difference. And so they had developed what I call healthy habits of body and mind. So if the students 1 week were being taught about mindfulness, their homework, their assignments was to practice mindfulness meditations. If it was learning about physical activity, they then had to practice various physical types of activity in class and at home. And this is something that Laurie Santos, Professor Laurie Santos at Yale University, says that knowing, she teaches a positive psychology course there. She says that knowing what makes you happy has no impact on your happiness whatsoever. It's all about action. It's about your habits. It's about your behaviors. So these students had been taught these, the skills of well-being, and then crucially, they were encouraged to establish healthy habits. Then really interestingly, they also had their test scores in standardized tests that these children had to take. Again, at the beginning of the study, these students in both control and the intervention schools were pretty much scoring the same kind of levels of results. But the wellbeing intervention students, their scores went up significantly over the period that they were being taught the wellbeing curriculum, and then those results were pretty much maintained over the following year. So Dr. Alejandro Adler would strongly argue, in fact, this is the kind of conclusion of his study, is that we can be confident that teaching the skills of well-being not only improves student well-being, it improves their ability to do well on standardized tests in school as well. So why is teaching happiness important? It's not just about test scores. This gentleman here is Professor Richard Layard. He runs the Wellbeing Research Centre at the London School of Economics. What he and his colleagues wanted to do was carry out a longitudinal study and look at adults that were reporting high levels of life satisfaction, and then traced them back through the data, had over 40 years worth of data, to their childhood. And they wanted to be able to answer the question, what in childhood is the strongest predictor of adult life satisfaction? And what they found was that the child's emotional health was the strongest predictor of adult life satisfaction. So essentially how happy a child was. And the weakest predictor was the child's intellectual development. So essentially the grades they were getting. And the significant kind of marker was at the age of 16. That was the strongest predictor, emotional health at 16. But what they then did was they thought, well, okay, students don't just stop learning at the age of 16. They go on to get A-levels and degrees and et cetera, et cetera. What if we add in all of the qualifications a person ever obtains? So up to master's, PhD level, does that make a bigger difference to their emotional health at 16? And what they found, and I'm just going to quote from Richard Layard's book, which is called, I've forgotten what it's called, but it will come back to me. He says the child's emotional health is significantly more important than all the qualifications a person ever obtains. And I find that fascinating, that how happy a child is at the age of 16 is a far more important predictor of their adult happiness than all the grades and qualifications they ever get in their lifetime. And you might be thinking, okay, well, that kind of sounds obvious, that happy children grow up to be happy adults. What impact can schools and teachers have? Surely all the cards are in the hands of kind of genetics and parental upbringing. Well, crucially, Richard Layard's research showed that actually teachers do have a major impact on children's happiness whilst at school. In fact, primary school teachers have more impact on the emotional health of the children than on the children's performance in maths, because in some areas of the data, they were able to see which school children went to and even which teachers they were specifically taught by. And they could kind of do this analysis to see the impact that individual teachers had on children compared to, the grades they were getting. But this isn't just primary, it's primary and secondary. Primary and secondary teachers have major effects on the emotional well-being of their children. So what Richard Layard argues, and it's something that I strongly believe, is that, when you ask most parents, you ask most teachers, what is it that you most want for the children in your care? Typically, it's along the lines of, I want them to be happy. And by that, we mean we want them to lead a life that is important to them, that is fulfilling, that is satisfying and enjoyable. And it doesn't matter whether children go on to be painters and decorators or artists or lawyers or entrepreneurs or whatever they choose to do, we want them to be satisfied and happy with their lives. And because Richard Layard says we know that happiness in childhood is the strongest predictor of adult life satisfaction, coupled with the fact that teachers have a major impact on children's happiness whilst at school, this is where we should be investing a lot more time, energy and resources into developing the capacity for our children to be emotionally healthy and happy whilst at school. And there's also, another kind of serious reason why adopting whole school approaches to well-being is important. And it's because our children's mental health appears to be suffering at the moment. And it has been kind of on decline for the last decade or so. So the Children's Society every year produced the Good Childhood Report. They've shown that over the last 10 years, roughly, there's been a significant decrease in children's life satisfaction. There's been a recent decrease in children's happiness with friends and also with school. We also know from their latest Good Childhood Report, which came out, I think, a month ago, that 15-year-olds in the UK are the least happy. They're the saddest children in Europe. So focusing on happiness and well-being in schools is not just, yes, we know that generally speaking, happier children learn better. We know that from good kind of robust evidence. We also know that focusing on children's well-being in school helps set them up for kind of a healthier, happier, more fulfilling adult life. But it's also about preventing this decline in their mental health whilst they're at school. These statistics do not have to be kind of inevitable, trajectories for children. That actually, when we focus on developing emotionally and physically healthy children at school, we prevent this decline in their mental health. We give them healthy habits of body and mind that increase their resilience and increase their capacity to handle kind of life's ups and downs. So that's kind of setting the backdrop, the kind of empirical backdrop about why why school can make you happy and why it's an important kind of facet to focus on. We're now going to look at the how can we bring this to life in a typical kind of classroom. I really love this concept of tribal classrooms by Professor Louis Cozzolino. Essentially, he says that, for the majority of the last 100,000 years, modern humans have lived in kind of hunter-gatherer tribes. And it's only really in the last 5 to 10,000 years that modern humans have moved from tribal-based societies to agricultural-based societies to the modern industrial-based societies that many of us live in now. And he says that although 5, even 10,000 years seems like a huge amount of time in human history, it is the blink of an eye in terms of biological evolution. He says we simply have not had enough time to evolve and move away from our tribal past. He says we are deeply rooted in our tribal past. And therefore, he says that tribal classrooms, that are based on kind of attachment-based relationships where all children feel like they belong and are part of a tribe, essentially a family in the classroom. Teachers that can tap into what he calls these primitive social instincts by creating these tribal classrooms, they can achieve amazing things in seemingly impossible educational settings. And I remember reading about tribal classrooms when I was teaching at an inner London primary school. I was an NQT, and in my RQT year, I was told, "Oh, Adrian, next year you're going to get the year ones. You're going to be teaching the year twos from September." And I remember, feeling sick in my stomach and kind of getting heart palpitations, because the year one class I was about to inherit were notorious in our school. Their year one teacher had gone off on long-term stress leave. Before that, their reception teacher had gone off on long-term stress leave. And I'm not saying it was a direct result of teaching this class, but they were definitely a contributing factor. They were not a cohesive group of children. They were always trying to get one another into trouble. They were always getting into trouble. They showed no fear, even though we had quite a formidable head teacher at the time. They didn't seem to be scared about being sent to go and speak with her. And so I was told, you're going to have this class. And I just remember thinking, how can I get these children to feel like, they need to look out for one another. They need to help each other learn together. And very fortuitously, it was the summer of 2012, before September. It was a London 2012 Olympics. And we were all blown away. We all, it was a London school. We all got massively involved in kind of celebrating the Olympics and preparing for them. And I really wanted to piggyback off Team GB's success, because Team GB were one of the most successful teams that I know. I love the fact that they've got positive male and female role models. They've got people from different colours and races and religions. So there was someone that every child in the class could kind of relate to. And so when we came back in September, I showed them this video montage, and I'm going to play it to you. And I just asked this question: what values, what qualities, what attributes do you think Team GB needed in order to be successful? So just bear that in mind. I'm just going to come out of presentation mode so I can share this video clip. Here we go. You should be able to see and hear this now. So as I play the video, what values, qualities, attributes do you think Team GB needed in order to be successful?
London 2012 will see the very best of us.
10,000 athletes from 200 countries will compete at over 30 venues.
Can Helen Glover and Heather Stanley become Team GB's first golden medal?
Glover and Stanley racing to the record book. They punch the air.
Great Britain's first gold medal.
They have beaten the greatest competitors of all time. She is the Olympic keirin champion. Great Britain delivered. Dreams do come true.
Britain is ready.
ready to hail new heroes on the day being dubbed Super Saturday.
The gold medalist, Great Britain. Oh, look at the time. It's a new world record.
It has been another successful day for the British team. 3 medals won at the rowing earlier this morning, 2 golds and a silver. More to come at the velodrome very soon.
They are on fire.
What a brilliant piece of sculling. They were marvellous.
80,000 ticket holders will be inside the stadium to see Jessica Ennis.
Oh my goodness, Jessica Ennis is the Olympic champion. This is a super duper Saturday.
It's gold! What a night!
The greatest night in the history of British athletics. It's a golden triumph for Andy Murray. Alistair Brownlee is the Olympic triathlon champion.
You little beauty, and a teenage kicking superstar from North Wales.
Nicola Adams has just made history. Charlotte Dujardin has iced the cake in style. A performance out of the very top drawer. Red toy! He becomes the greatest achiever ever. Gold medal is going to go to Laura Trott.
Two gold medals for Great Britain. Beautiful!
We lit the flame and we lit up the world.
So let me come back. So I would then get my class to kind of discuss in groups, in pairs, you know, the values, the qualities, the attributes they think Team GB needed to be successful. And then we'd have just a class discussion. And then I would be scribing their ideas on a whiteboard. So let me just go back to presentation mode. And typically children would say values like courage or kindness or friendship, teamwork, effort, focus. You know, we have a real rich discussion. And in fact, you can have some lovely discussions, you know, about emotions. Why do you think some of the athletes got really emotional about achieving amazing things? So you can have some really rich discussions on this. And then I would say to the children, okay, choose a value that you think is really important for a team to be successful. It could be one that you shared, or one that a partner shared, or one we maybe haven't even got on the board yet. Write it. I'd give them a plain piece of paper, write it in bold on your piece of paper, and then fill your page with color, because we're going to create a team flag. And so we pieced all of our ones together. This was class Picasso, and in that moment we became Team Picasso. My class in London, they were class year 2, we became team year 2. And there are certain things that I really want to pull out from this, the team flag with my classes. One of the most important is that you might have just contributed one small part to the flag, but you are part of something bigger than just yourself. That you belong to Team Picasso, that in fact the success of Team Picasso relies on you and everyone doing their part and upholding these values. Team Picasso came up with values like listen, determination, tolerance, focus, love, cooperation, teamwork. And the other important thing to say to children is, look, these are works in progress. Okay, I'm not expecting everybody from day one to show 100% focus and cooperation and tolerance the whole time. But these are values that we are working towards. And so when there were inevitable moments in the classroom or out on playground, I would often bring groups of students over to the flag, and we would just have a little moment just to be like, what values did we forget about when we were having that argument outside? What is it that we need to work on? So it was always bringing it back to a positive, bringing it back to, look, you are part of a team. These are your teammates. These are our values. And it was giving us a real sense of purpose and a sense of direction. And it really had a big impact with my year twos. And this is why it's something that I've done every year with classes that I've taught. And in fact, this is why it's the first chapter in my book. We also know from research that a sense of belonging is fundamental to learning. So this is why, you know, when at the bottom we've got 2 extra parts of the team flag. When new members join, they get to contribute to the team flag so that they have that sense of belonging and importance as well. The lovely thing is, since the book's come out, you know, people tweet me pictures of their team flags, and this comes from a school in the British school in the Netherlands, so 6HO, and I love how they've made their parts of the flag jigsaw pieces to show how they all kind of connect and fit together. Tribal classrooms are also important because I feel that they will help some of our most disadvantaged and vulnerable pupils the most. We know from research that children dealing with ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, just to give some examples, it could be growing up in a home with domestic violence or alcohol abuse, or a significant bereavement, or even parental separation. These are all examples of ACEs. And the sad thing is, research shows that the more ACEs a child grows up with, the greater the risk of them developing a mental illness. But some really reassuring research came out from Public Health Wales and Bangor University a few years ago. And what it showed was that they were looking at children dealing with multiple ACEs, and some, despite kind of quite difficult personal circumstances, showed a level of resilience. And it, you know, when they dug down further into the children's backgrounds, they found these common themes that if children were to have these 3 protective factors, they were 50% less likely to develop a mental illness, which is a huge buffer. These 3 protective factors were having at least one relationship with a safe, trusted adult. So as the class teacher, as the teaching assistant, as the deputy head, the head teacher in the school, you can be that kind of that tribal leader, that safe, trusted adult that every child knows that they can turn to and rely on, you know, if they need your support. The second protective factor was having supportive friends. And when you think about primary schools in particular, where children are kind of lumped together, it's a bit of a lottery who you're in a class with, and you're with those children all day, every day throughout your years at that school. It's imperative that those children learn how to become supportive classmates and friends to one another. And the third aspect was, protective factor was regular participation in sports. And I think that's twofold. One, we know that regular physical activity is massively beneficial to your physical and mental health. But secondly, most sports take place as part of teams, and teams have sports coaches as well that can be that safe, trusted adult. So, you know, relationships, strong personal relationships, creating tribal classrooms, these are fundamental things for helping children feel safe, helping them feel secure, helping them feel like they belong and are able to not only access the learning, but access everything that a school community has to offer. In terms of how it kind of links to progress and learning and academic kind of progress, there was a brilliant blog written by Professor Dylan William on his website, and it was about feedback, it was about growth mindset. And what he was saying was, you know, at the heart of progress in a classroom, it all boils down to relationships, particularly when it comes to feedback, because he says you can give 2 students exactly the same piece of feedback and it can motivate one child and demotivate another. So it's only when your students trust you, it's only when you know your students well and you know exactly how to tailor the feedback to motivate all of your students, that is when you see the kind of real progress. But he says ultimately it comes down to those safe, trusting relationships. And he says without that relationship, all the research in the world won't matter. So this is why tribal classrooms, I think, are one of the most important things that we can do in terms of children's well-being, but also in terms of their learning in schools. And what does a tribal classroom feel like from a child's perspective? This was a teacher, again, who'd read my book, had introduced lots around kind of tribal classrooms, sent me this note that a 9-year-old girl in her class had written. And to me, it just perfectly sums up what a tribal classroom is all about. She says, when people think of a class, they think of a room of children in a school. I think of my class here at JSL as much more than that. The children I sit next to, we have a bond. We trust each other, we help each other, and we learn together. We know we can ask each other for help. We are definitely more than a room of children. So this is what that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of a successful team feels like from a child. It's not about competition with classmates. It's about this trust. It's about this bond. It's about, I love that expression, we learn together. That is beautiful to me. So something for you to reflect on is, how can you foster a sense of tribe among the children you teach? You know, I do think that instinctively tribal classrooms are what good teachers do, just day in, day out, without thinking about it. I guess my part of the, you know, the message from my book and the chapter on tribal classrooms and this training is, how can we make it explicit? How can we make it a real conscious act to foster that sense of tribe? And it can be things like the team flag. It can also be what some experts call the micro moments in schools, which feel kind of small to us maybe as adults and teachers, but are massively profound to children. It's those little chats out on playground duty. It's those little conversations you have in passing in the corridors. Those small moments actually matter. They let children know that they've been noticed, that you're interested in them, that you care about them. So don't underestimate the small things in schools. But just ponder that question: how can you foster a sense of tribe among the children that you teach? So moving on to mindfulness, what is it? There's a lot of myths, I think, about what mindfulness is. You know, I love this image. Many of you might have seen it before. There's a person walking their dog through a park on a sunny day. The person has a full mind. They're probably worrying about something that's happened in the past, or fast forwarding something that's happening in the future or might happen, whereas the dog is being mindful. They notice the sunshine, they're aware of the trees. And essentially mindfulness is about awareness. It's about being aware in the present moment of what's happening in your mind, your body, and the external environment, with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. And essentially mindfulness is a type of mind training. It's about training ourselves to notice where our mind is, and if it's in that state on the left, that mind wandering state, we can notice our minds have drifted off and we can bring it back to focus on the present moment. That's essentially what mindfulness is in its most kind of simplest form. Is there decent evidence to show that it works? There is emergent evidence, which means it's not as long-standing as the evidence for mindfulness in adults, but the emergent evidence is positive and it's growing. It's growing all the time. A recent meta-analysis of randomized control trials carried out by Dr. Darren Dunning at Cambridge University showed significant positive effects of mindfulness-based interventions on the following kind of factors. So mindfulness, so the ability to pay attention in the present moment, executive functioning, which is our ability to plan, to make decisions, to problem solve, also positive effects on attention. And when you think about it, executive functioning and attention are absolutely fundamental to learning. And then also mental health issues as well. So depression, anxiety, stress, negative behaviors all show kind of significant positive effects after mindfulness-based interventions. So there is promising evidence, and there's more and more coming out. One massive study that's taking place right now is called the Myriad trial, which is the lead researchers are University of Oxford. They're trialing a curriculum called .B, run by the Mindfulness in Schools project. And the Myriad project essentially is looking at developing resilience in adolescence. And the reason they're doing that is because one of the sadder, more sobering statistics of mental health in childhood is that the first major onset of depression used to be, this is about 50 years ago, used to be in your 40s. So if you're going to get depression for the first time about 50 years ago, you would typically get it in your 40s. Now, the first major onset of depression is typically in the age bracket 13 to 15. So if you're going to get depression for the first time, typically going to get it in your teenage years. And what the Myriad project wanted to do is, if we teach a mindfulness curriculum to teenagers, adolescents, can it reverse that statistic? Can it prevent children's mental health declining so that they don't get depression, they don't suffer from acute anxiety? And that's the question that they're trying to answer through this 6-year study. I think they've got a budget of £6 million funded by the Wellcome Trust. It's one of the, I think it's the largest randomized control trial looking at mindfulness in schools and its impact on young people's mental health. I was going to show you a short video, but I'm not going to, just because of time. But essentially, I can share the link afterwards. There was a feasibility study, so a kind of a pre-study before this much larger trial to see if it had any impact, mindfulness, on young people's mental health. And what they found was that in this feasibility study, there were improvements in the mental health of the students that were taking the mindfulness curriculum. And then what happened when they tracked these students during the exam period, compared to the control students, the gap between the kind of positive mental health increased during the exam period. And what they concluded was that the mindfulness curriculum, the mindfulness techniques that these students were learning helped them cope better at the most stressful time, which was the exam period, compared to the students that hadn't been taught mindfulness. And I find that fascinating. I find that really interesting and something that can really potentially help students when we are experiencing moments of acute stress. And I think, a global pandemic might be one of those times. What does it look like in the classroom? Do you need joss sticks and whale music and cushions and sitting cross-legged? You can do if you want to, but ultimately these are 4 of my students when I was teaching at a London primary school, doing a mindfulness meditation partway through an English lesson. We called it taking a mindful moment. So they would put their pencils down, adjust their posture, nice straight spine, both feet flat on the floor, and I would just guide them through a short practice. And if you indulge me now, I'll guide you through a short mindfulness practice so you can experience what a child in my classroom might experience. So if you could consciously change your posture, so just adjust yourself so you have a nice straight spine, both of your feet are flat on the floor, your hands and arms are just resting in your lap wherever they feel most comfortable for you. You can just gently close your eyes if that feels okay with you, or just avert your gaze down. I'm just going to invite you just to take your attention down to the soles of your feet and just become aware of the sensations in your feet in this moment. Just notice your feet making contact with the floor and the ground beneath you. And then just move your awareness to the parts of your body that are making contact with the chair. Having a sense of the weight of the body sitting here in this moment. Just noticing the parts of the body making contact with the chair. And as you're sitting here, you might notice the subtle movements of your body as you breathe in and out. So just taking your awareness to the center of your body, either your abdomen or your chest. Just see if you can notice your body rise and expand as you breathe in, and soften and relax as you breathe out. See if you can be with the whole of your in-breath and the whole of your out-breath. Just breathing in and just breathing out. And if your mind wanders off, you can just gently bring your attention to focus back on your in-breath and your out-breath. And then just widen your attention to notice the whole of your body sitting here again. Become aware of any sounds. You can just gently open your eyes and have a bit of a stretch. So typically in my class, we would meditate in the morning straight after register. And then we might take some pauses throughout the day, those mindful moments. That meditation I guided you through was less than 2 minutes long. And I would also teach them a mindfulness curriculum called Pause-B, which is aimed at primary, Key Stage 2 primary students. But there are some really useful kind of books and resources that you could buy. I will send these slides through, so don't worry about scribbling down the names. The book in the middle is actually more for us as adults. I would highly recommend Mindfulness, Finding Peace in the Frantic World. And also, if you didn't know, Headspace, the app, which I have on my phone, I use it when I'm out and about on the go, is free for UK educators. So if you Google Headspace for educators, find your school's details, you can kind of register and get a free subscription, which is worth about £60 a year. And there are courses you can do. So I mentioned the Mindfulness in Schools project. There's Youth Mindfulness, there's Mind Up. So there are training courses that your school can kind of put you on. Typically, you do need to have taken part in your own mindfulness training yourself and been practicing for a number of months. But I would highly recommend having a curriculum and teaching students mindfulness through a kind of structured curriculum. I've found it's worked really well in the schools I've worked in. So just conscious of time, we're just going to move on to the kind of last 2 points now, which is the negativity bias and acts of kindness. So the negativity bias, all humans typically have a negativity bias, and this is an evolutionary hangover. Essentially, our hunter-gatherer ancestors that were out in the savannah, the ones that could spot dangers quickly and avoid them, they survived and passed on their genes to us. Our more mindful ancestors that stopped to admire a beautiful view or smell a rose were gobbled up by a lion, and so they didn't pass on their genes to us. So over millennia, our brains have been primed and sculpted to always be on the lookout for threats and dangers in order to avoid them. And this is why Dr. Rick Hanson, psychologist, says that our brains are like Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. But it doesn't have to be this way. We know from positive psychology and learning the skills of well-being, as Rick Hanson says, we can learn to weave the positive into the fabric of our brains. One way that we can do this is something Rick Hanson calls taking in the good. Different ways that we can do this, but one of them is something called what went well. It's sometimes called 3 good things. What the research shows is, and this was done on adults, is when they got adults at the end of every day to write down 3 good things that have gone well for them and why, over a period of 6 months, even though this intervention was just for 1 week, they showed gradual but significant improvements in their well-being over a 6-month period. And what they found was, even though the intervention was for just 1 week, many of the participants carried on doing it. And the ones that carried on doing the what went well activity the longest showed the biggest improvements in their well-being. So this shows the more regularly we practice taking in the good, focusing on the small positives in our lives, the better it is for our mental health and our well-being. What I do in class, what we do in my school, is we do it just once a week on a Friday. So we stop on a Friday afternoon, we think back over our week, the positive lessons that we've had, the fun games we played at playtime, the fun activities we did in PE, whatever it is. Children write down 3 things that have gone well for them, and they put an asterisk next to 1, and they get to share one of their 3 good things. And then we give our week a round of applause as a class, and then we get ready to go home. The reason I think it's also important to do it at the end of the week, particularly the very last thing we do, is something called peak end theory, which was developed by a Nobel Prize winning economist called Daniel Kahneman. And what peak end theory shows is that we typically, when we have an experience, we typically remember the peak emotional response, whether that's positive or negative, and we typically remember endings. And so what Daniel Kahneman showed is if we have an experience that is where the ending is positive, we will typically remember the whole experience as either as positive, even if it was neutral or even negative. So I think, you know, given that a typical school week can be a bit like this for many of our students, if we end on a positive note, if we savor the good things, the small good things that have happened, we are more likely to remember the whole week positively. We're more likely to go into the weekend feeling hopeful and optimistic and looking forward to coming back on Monday, which is what we want for all of our students. Rick Hanson's keen to point out this is not about making stuff up. It's not about ignoring the difficult and hard aspects of our lives. It is simply about shining a light on, noticing and savoring the small good things that happen every day that typically pass us by, that normally we pay no attention to whatsoever. And then what we can do as well with the post-it notes, create an A3 What Went Well book, post-it notes go in that, and that goes in our book corner, and students can often choose to read kind of old what went wells to kind of relive them. So I'd highly recommend that simple activity and just getting into the habit as a class of remembering, savoring, reliving, talking about the small successes, the small positives that have happened through our days and through our weeks. So just to end, last kind of 5 minutes on random acts of kindness. We know that the research shows that when we take part in random acts of kindness, we show improvements in our physical and mental health. Just very briefly, I love the science of kindness. Some stats of kindness. We know that kindness is contagious, that we have this pay it forward mentality, that when someone is kind to us, we're far more likely to pay it forward and be kind to someone else. The example often given is that if you're driving along and someone lets you out at a junction, you're far more likely to let someone else out at a future junction. So kindness is contagious. It has this ripple effect. Second thing is that kindness feels good, that when we are kind to other people, that could be donating money to charity, it could be buying someone a coffee, the reward center of our brain lights up. We get a hit of dopamine. So we actually feel happier from being kind to other people. The third thing about kindness is that it does us good. We know that when we do an act of kindness, when we receive an act of kindness, or when we simply just witness someone else doing an act of kindness, our bodies release a hormone called oxytocin. It's sometimes called the love hormone. It helps us feel connected to others. But oxytocin also protects our hearts. It reduces the levels of cortisol in our system, the stress hormone. It also triggers the release of nitric oxide, which in turn reduces the amount of free radicals in our system. And free radicals cause tissue damage and cell aging. So I always say, if you want to stay looking young and youthful, just be kind. And if you don't feel like a particularly kind person, just hang out with other kind people and watch them being kind, because your body will still release oxytocin. And then eventually, because kindness is contagious, if you keep watching your friends being kind, you will eventually start to be kind too. So it's a win-win situation. So what we did in my school is, and we're going to be doing it this year as well, is Anti-Bullying Week. We rebranded to it's called To Be Kind Week. Every child from reception up to year 6 was encouraged to carry out a random act of kindness as part of home learning and record it somehow. Tell us what you did. Tell us how it made you feel to do that act of kindness. Tell us how did the recipient feel. Take a photo of it, draw a picture, whatever you want to do, just capture it somehow. And the first year we did it, we had really thoughtful acts of kindness. We had children just helping out with chores at home, loading and unloading the dishwasher. One of the children on the screen took board games and books to a local children's hospital, so the children on the wards had fun things to read and play with. A boy in my class, a keen baker, went with his dad, baked cupcakes and went with his dad to the local train station at 7 p.m. in the evening to greet tired commuters with his treats. So really lovely things. The following year we said, okay, we want to do individual acts of kindness, but be creative, do something different to what you did last year, but do a class act of kindness. Take your whole class out into the local community and do a class act of kindness. I know that in the current restrictions, this will not be possible, but we can still be creative. We can still reach out into our local communities and do acts of kindness. What the year 3s did was grab a stash of Metro newspapers, write kindness quotes on them, things like that smile looks good on you, or be a light to the world. And they gave them out to commuters and had the school email address on it. And I'll just read one of the emails we got through. Joanna said, the past few days were not easy for me. I had a horrible morning today, but on my way to work, I picked up a Metro that was left behind. The little note, do all things with love on the paper, really made my day. And what was lovely about the year 3's act of kindness is that we could show to the whole school. Some of the people had emailed where they picked up their newspaper. Some had picked up on the Hammersmith and City line, or the District line, or the Northern line. We could show that your small act of kindness that started off in Brockley in South East London had literally spread and rippled across the whole of London. And then in my school in Hertfordshire, we did the same thing. And then we got a card through the post about a month after it's called To Be Kind Week. And it said, dear head teacher, I've been meaning to send this note for several weeks and apologise for the delay. I wanted to say a very heartfelt thank you to you and your staff for encouraging the children in your care to think about others in their random acts of kindness. I received a delicious cookie and a lovely poinsettia. I've been widowed this year and I cannot say how much I appreciated this act of kindness. Thank you very much indeed. So something that we teach children in the schools I've worked in is that kindness is a superpower, that we all have the power and the ability to be kind in small everyday ways. And your act of kindness might just put a smile on someone's face and brighten up their day, or it might be exactly what someone needs at their time of need, just like this woman has shown in her card. And I just think now more than ever, when you think about everything that's going on locally, globally, we need to reach out, we need to help others. So I would say be creative with kindness weeks this year. Think about, it might be that you get a class to make beautiful works of art, pieces of art for local care homes that, you know, might be struggling now with not having visitors and things. It might be about reaching out to your local hospital and sending notes to people that work in the NHS. Whatever it is, we can still do acts of kindness even if we physically can't, you know, go out into the local town and spread kindness that way. So just this brings me to the end of my talk. Just to say that any projects around teaching and developing wellbeing in schools has to start with teachers and also modeling wellbeing. Alison Gopnik says children learn far more from their caregivers' unconscious behaviours than any of their conscious manipulations. So if we're teaching children about kindness, we need to be kind. If we're teaching about tribal classrooms, we need to make sure that our staff rooms have a sense of team. We've got to lead by example. And the other thing I'd say about this year, we have to pace ourselves. It's probably going to be the longest year we've ever experienced in teaching. We cannot go at our normal tempo. We're going to have to slow down. We're going to have to do less, but do it better and focus on the things that really matter. So please take good care of yourselves and pace yourselves this year. So just to sum up, children's happiness is the strongest predictor of adult happiness, and it underpins learning. Schools have a big influence. Can you create a team atmosphere in your class and your school community where all children feel like they belong and are part of a family? Meditate with your class, encourage moments of stillness, and importantly, give it a go yourself. Rewire that negativity bias by practicing taking in the good with your class. Encourage and celebrate small acts of kindness. Maybe try and at school to be kind week and see what happens in your local community. And finally, be a good role model for well-being. Look after yourself, your pupils and your colleagues, and play the long game. So thank you very much for listening. I know it's very tight between our next sessions. I will come out of presentation mode in case there were any questions in the chat. But yeah, sorry, that was a whistle-stop tour of well-being in the classroom.
Thank you, Adrian. That was absolutely brilliant. I know that everyone's going to, I could see those with their cameras on were busy writing lots of ideas down. So thank you so much. I know I had lots of takeaways, and I'm sure everyone's really eager to go back to their own roles and try some of your tips out as well. So thank you so much. And I'm sure everyone would join me in just giving you a little virtual clap. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What I will do, Amy, I've got a little PDF with links to further reading resources and some of the things I've talked about, and I'll send the slides through so people can have them as well.
Thank you very much. So I think everybody has their links to their next workshop, and Adrian, yours is in a couple of minutes, so you need to walk around and spread your legs a little bit and stretch your legs.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.